What's up, fellas? Today we are going to talk about how you can potentially increase your bench without having to get any stronger. You might ask, how is that? I think most people kind of already have an idea in their head. They say, okay, well, if you get more technically efficient, you could potentially, with the same contractile property of your muscles, lift more weight, right? Whether that's via ROM reduction, better control of our back, a better bar path. All of these things can be done to increase our bench without necessarily getting any stronger. But what we're going to focus on today is the bar, the wrist, and the hand, basically. Just by looking at that, I've seen some people able to increase their 1RM some amount. I'm not going to make any claims about how much your 1RM is going to go up because that's probably bogus. But I have seen people improve their numbers just by focusing on this little area of where we're transferring force into the bar. When we first get into lifting, we're told, oh yeah, you don't want your wrist cocked back. We don't want it back here, right? We don't want the bar sitting high in our hand with our wrist back because it's putting weird torque on your wrist and you're bleeding power. So then what you do is you take it and you straighten out your wrist and you, like you're throwing a punch, and point your knuckles at the ceiling. But if that bar is set high in your hand, you are going to need ungodly strong basically wrists, forearms, to keep it in that position when you get to maximal percentages. It's either going to roll out of your hand or it's going to just bend your wrist back. More often than not, most people don't have the strength to maintain that position. So if, like, we can look at this a couple different ways, right? If we think, okay, what we're scared about is torque placed on the wrist, all right? Torque is just the distance from the fulcrum times the weight. So if we just reduce that distance by setting the bar lower in our hand, then we don't have to really worry about the torque. It's going to be somewhat negligible, and if we put it really low in the hand, it's going to be actually zero because it's going to be a zero distance from the fulcrum. So that's going to be address the torque thing. If we think about it as bleeding power, right, we want the weight directly above our wrist joint if we want to be able to transfer force into the bar efficiently. Again, by putting the bar as low in our palm as we can, we are going to be able to transfer force efficiently because it's directly above. I'm going to attach a caveat here that there are plenty of good benchers that will use a wrist wrap to reinforce their wrists so they can not worry about the torque and put the bar high in their hand intentionally as a means of reducing range of motion. But we are also achieving some degree of reduced range of motion by using this strategy, right? If we take it high in the hand and then stack our wrist, right, we have some amount of distance that by putting it here, we don't have. So there's some small amount of reduction in range of motion there, which I tend to find rather important. But for me, the most important thing is the fact that usually people are going to have a better ability to create power off their chest when the bar is directly above their wrist joint. So that kind of brings me to the final phase of this, is how can we reliably do this? The idea of get the bar lower in your palm makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, but then they have a very, very difficult time consistently doing it, and like what that looks like in practical application. So I'll tell you how I do it in my setup. If I am under the bar, this is the bar, I start putting upward force into the bar. This is important, right? And I'm going to point my thumbs and all of my fingers up at the ceiling while pressing into the bar and applying some degree of external rotation like torque. And by putting a bunch of upward force in the bar, enough that the bar is not lifting out of the rack, but quite a bit, I'm going to dig that bar lower in my palm to the point where I could take it out and do some reps without ever closing my hand, because there's no inclination for the bar to go anywhere because it's directly above the wrist joint. It's in a stable position. So sometimes I'll take the bar 95, 135, 185, 225 with my hands open just to make sure that I'm holding it in that spot that I want to achieve. And then when it starts getting heavy, I take that more sustainable position and then I reinforce it. I grip the bar. I squeeze it as if I was trying to leave fingerprints in the bar, right? But the idea is if we take a shitty position and we immediately reinforce it, the bar is going to feel fine. 95 is going to feel fine. 135 is going to feel fine. And it's only going to be when you get to heavy percentages that you can no longer reinforce that shitty position that it starts bending your wrist, right? The idea is that if we don't reinforce it with the lighter weights, we're forced to put it in a position that we can maintain. We can kind of double check that by doing some hands open reps if you want. But the main thing is on your setup, you want to be digging your hands into the bar while pointing all of your digits up at the ceiling. And that's going to probably allow you to put it in a little bit better position, transfer force into the bar more efficiently. And if it feels a bit weird at first, don't worry about it. It's just anytime you do something different, it's going to feel foreign. We've ingrained a motor pattern for long enough. Any deviation from that motor pattern is going to feel awkward. As long as you don't feel like it's dangerous, it's going to roll out of your hand. I might be a little worried then. I wouldn't worry about it tremendously. And then the last thing I will tell you is that after we've dug it into our palm, we have it low, we have that slight degree of external torque into the bar. There's kind of two ways we could go about doing this. We can either wrap our fingers around it, perfectly valid, like here, wrap around, or we can clasp our fingers, where instead of wrapping around and squeezing, we're clasping on top of it. Just a slight difference in how some people grip the bar. You might notice that is how I grip the bar, is I take my tips of my fingers and I clasp it on top of the bar. That way there's almost a little bit of space to the back. Just my personal preference. Other people prefer to wrap their fingers all the way around the bar. But I hope this helps. I basically just made this because one of my clients just sent me a bench video and I figured this would be very hard to explain via typing. So I'm just gonna put this up and I'm gonna link him to it.